It is Friday, the 28th of August, 2026. The time, of course, is 10 past tomorrow, and I'm going to throw some numbers at you now. Last week, from Monday to Friday, I did the equivalent of 7 weeks of human work in 5 days. Let me explain that all to you. Using Claude Code and Codex, the two agentic tools that I use, from Monday to Friday, I did 19 decent sized jobs for 10 past tomorrow across topics like business strategy work, course and presentation, content creation, research, client work, coding development. And so I actually used the tools, Claude Code and Codex, to do an analysis of that Monday to Friday work week. And we worked out that I did the equivalent of 291 human hours of work. And if you attribute average wages to those, which I'll explain later, that was the equivalent of about $47,700 in human wages if I'd paid capable people at like mid-industry rates to do that same work for me. And me personally, to do all that work, I spent 31 hours driving the systems, driving Codex, driving Claude Code across that Monday to Friday, and then checking their work and refining their work and improving their work. So those are pretty massive numbers. I'm going to talk to you about this exercise, this experiment that I did. The numbers surprised me, right? So I'll explain how I got to them for you. But first, like, why did I do this? There's an AI commentator that I follow and really respect. His name is Azim Azar. He writes a newsletter called Exponential View that has been going for a long time. He writes about AI and technology and the economy. And he suggested in his newsletter that you keep a weekly audit of like the big jobs that you hand to AI and the AI that you used and what did it cost you and what time did you spend driving them, how much time did you spend reviewing the work and improving the work, and how long would it take capable humans to have done the same thing. So he did the experiment on himself, and he said that with his agentic tools, he did 62 jobs in that week. He paid the subscriptions that he paid for his tools worked out to about $800 for that week. And he reckoned that the same work from people would have cost him around $19,000 plus 48 hours of his own time. So he quite openly said these are rough numbers. Some of them have to be estimates, you know, about like how many human hours would it take to do the equivalent work. And so are mine. I'll be open about that. Some of them have to be estimated. Some of them are hard, concrete numbers, but the numbers are enough to tell us the direction of where this thing's going. And the experiment to me is fascinating because it really suggests this new world that we're in, where when you're using these agent platforms powerfully and properly, the full capabilities that they give one human using those tools, right? So, of course, when I saw that, my eyes lit up. I said, I'm going to do the same experiment. And so I ran the same analysis back from last Monday to Friday. What did I do inside Claude Code and Codex? I went back through every session that I'd run that week. And using the tools themselves, I said, okay, let's group all the work that I did into job categories. Um, and then I put a dollar replacement rate on each of those jobs. So like what would, as I say, what would it have cost me to commission and pay a capable, just mid-level industry person? I didn't price it at like top of the industry, but what would it cost me to pay a good mid-level person to do that same work? So the numbers that I attributed were these. I'm going to tell you the category of work that I did and what I attributed, what would I have paid a person to do that type of work. So for the administrative work that I did with these tools, I said $45 an hour for a human equivalent. For research, $90 an hour for a good human research. For copywriting, $120 per hour. For the building of teaching and workshop presentation and public speaking delivery material, I attributed $150 for like collating, researching, putting all that together, building the actual materials. For web and code development, $180 per hour. And for business strategy work, I'm doing a lot of business strategy work internally on 10 Past Tomorrow at the moment. I attributed $250 per hour for business strategy work that I did with these tools. So all of those are New Zealand dollars, and of course you could argue with them, and probably will. You could say that you should pay a human more or less for those dollars. I'd actually say that's not the point. They're all kind of directionally in the right space, but I'm going to use those dollar rates in the future when I do this test again, so that I can start to track, am I, for the same amount of hours that I'm putting into these tools, am I getting more or less value out of them in the future, right? So by category, maybe you'd be interested to hear by category, what type of work did I do, and like what was the kind of dollar value that I got out of them. Interestingly, because I'm not a coder, I'm not a technical person, I don't know how to write a single line of code, but last week I did 144 estimated human hours of coding and development with these tools, worth the equivalent of $26,000 of human wages to do that. Next is like my teaching and presentation and keynote delivery preparation, doing the research, collating the information, writing my script, gathering my past presentations, what ones were relevant, bringing them all together, creating bespoke presentations and teaching material. That was the equivalent of 70 hours of human assistance at $10,500. Business strategy, I did the equivalent of 32 human hours last week, worth 8,000 human dollars. And then content administration research together was about 45 human hours of work at $3,300. So if you add it all up, what you get is I did 291 human hours of work last week, worth $47,705. So some of the big work, uh, actually, look, I won't. I've given some pretty good definition there. So what you can see, another way to think about this is like I've got this little company inside my laptop, and the agents essentially they go out and they employ a developer, and then they employ a strategist and a course producer and a keynote slide deck creator and an executive assistant who does my administration. Um, all of those are inside the little business inside my laptop, right? I'd hate to imagine what their staff parties are like, but this is where the 30.6 hour figure comes in. It's arguably the most important number in all of this. 30.6 hours that's how many hours of my time I spent last week, Monday to Friday, in those tools, Claude Code and Codex. Writing the briefs for the tools, answering its questions, redirecting them when they were going off track, checking facts, reading their drafts, spotting the things that weren't quite right, bringing it back on track, checking their work, refining their work, improving their work, deciding whether it was good enough to use. So 30.6 hours, that feels about right to me. That's about 6 hours per day. And that feels right. Like most of my working day is now in these tools, just staring them, checking them, proofing the work, improving the work with them. It's got to be better than what they first give you as an output, right? So wrangling and improving. So if you take my time out of 291 human hours in total, you take away those 30.6 hours, I'm left with a saving. You could look at it one way, a saving of 260 hours saved. Or you could say it's in 1 week, in 5 days, I did 32 and a half working human days, right? It took me 30 hours last week to do the equivalent of 7 40-hour weeks, right? That's enough. I've hammered that point. Um, and all of those jobs produced something I used. I only analyzed the jobs that I ended up using the work. But using using needs some definition and some nuance as well, because using doesn't mean I just took the output and off I went. I refined it, I improved it, I checked it, I applied critical thinking to it, right? So perhaps, and this might be quite revealing to some people or confronting, maybe email is a good example to talk to. So I use an agent to read emails that come to me, and then it goes and it searches my whole system. An email comes in from person A, and it goes and reads every email I've ever had with person A, as well as goes to the client folder in my Google Drive that that person belongs to, reads about all of the work that I've been doing with that person, checks all of my AI transcripts that I've had with that person plus that company, um, looks at calendar invites, gathers all the context to know what's going on with that person. It's been tuned to write in my tone of voice, and so it drafts emails and leaves them in my draft folder, ready for me to review. Now, that system's been getting better and better over the last year or so. Now I have to make minimal refinements to those drafts, but I do have to check every single one of them. None of them goes out without me. Um, and I make, as I say, I make my refinements. So there were 85 emails drafted last week by that system. Um, I edited every single one of them, usually changing 10 to 20%, right? So I still find that extremely useful, and I add the details that I know. So that's like, it's a good example of where my job is moving. I'm doing much less of the first draft, and I don't just mean with emails. I attribute that to all my work. That's the direction. Much less of the wrangling, the heavy work, the coordination work, the synthesis work, the drafting work, and much more of the refinement work, the making it excellent, and checking the work, right? So you might want to know the cost of all this. I'm on the top plans from Anthropic and OpenAI, so they cost me, together, they cost me about 178 New Zealand dollars per week. Um, Now that's on the subscriptions, but actually if I was connecting through the API and I was actually paying token per token, because for those who don't know, we get so much more value out of these subscriptions than we would if we were just paying token per token, right? If I was paying token per token for all the tokens I used last week, I would have paid about $8,100. But instead, through the subscriptions, I paid $178, right? That alone is incredible and deserves its own conversation. Um, I also pay for Microsoft Copilot Premium and for Gemini AI Pro. Um, Within 10 past tomorrow, we all have access to all of those systems. Those ones actually don't bring me any value because I don't use them on any real work. We only have them so that for our clients who use those systems, we can be in the game. We know how to use them as well. But all of that is to say, you could boil this down to a simple comparison, which is to say, I spent $178 of AI subscriptions last week for my two agentic platforms, compared against $47,705 of estimated human work. Roughly 270 times what I paid in those agent subscriptions. That leaves out my own time, um, but we can treat it as a super interesting comparison. I don't want to treat it as a straight up proper ROI or human versus AI. I'm not proposing this as human versus AI. I'm proposing this as human with AI. What can one person who's agentically powered, what can you do, right? So I talk a lot about the gap between what AI can do and how organizations and people are actually using it. You remember we call it the AI adoption to capability gap. For me, this analysis of last week is like a canary down the coal mine, right? These systems can squeeze 7 weeks of human work into 5 days. And I don't think we've even worked out yet what does that do to jobs and teams and the people managing them when this becomes the middle of the bell curve, when most of us are working in this way, right? I think my own week, that Monday to Friday that I've analyzed, I think it's a clue. I think it's the direction of where we're going and with work. I write much less of the first draft, and I spend most of my time working out what do I really want and how can I get it from first draft to excellence. Um, and so, if that's even close to the future of the shape of all of our work, then AI adoption is going to ask much more of you and your organizations than just which tools shall we buy. That's where I think we're all going. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, if you've got your own thoughts about this analysis of my Monday to Friday working week, I'd love to hear them underneath this video or find me over on LinkedIn, and I'd love to engage over there.